Well, I want to start by saying thanks to Piper last week for preaching, and I got to listen to his sermon, which was no easy thing. As you may have figured out, we had some problems with some technical stuff last week, and the sermon did not record either service. And so Piper was good enough to actually re-preach it on Thursday to an empty room. And so if you see the video now, his family came down, so a few people scattered around, so he wasn't totally by himself. But thanks to that, I got to hear the sermon, and he did a great job. Really good on John chapter 15 and 16. Burnett and I had a great time last weekend. We were down in Oregon. Our middle son, David, and his wife had a chance to come up from California, and we were able to kind of meet in the middle. So we had a couple days with them, and it was really good to have that time. I thought I'd start this morning by telling you the story, part of the story at least, of a young man named Timothy Villalba. Timothy, in 2002, was a 7-year-old boy living in the Philippines, being raised by a single mother in what anyone would term abject poverty. There was no money. Oftentimes, there wasn't even food. But fortunately for Timothy, he got enrolled in the child care ministry of Compassion International, and was adopted by an elderly gentleman from Texas, a guy by the name of George Walker. And Timothy, getting into the program, one day received his first letter from his new benefactor, George. It said this: "Timothy, I want to be your new pen pal. I'm an old man, 77 years old, but I love kids, and though we have not met, I love you already. I live in Texas. I will write to you from time to time. Good luck, George Walker." You know, as I've thought about Compassion International, there are thousands and thousands of children who have been helped throughout the world by ministries like Compassion International, who've had their needs cared for, whether it was food or medicine or education. And there are lots of organizations that are involved in those kinds of efforts to help the poor, to help the needy, to help the underserved. What's interesting is that so often when you dig into the roots of those organizations, whether it is their upfront overt mission or whether you find it buried in their history, what you find are Christians. You find people who are followers of Jesus Christ, who are deeply engaged in caring for and serving the needs of those who are powerless to care for themselves, those that the world has largely ignored. I wonder why that is. I think we can really trace it back to a dinner meeting that happened about 2,000 years ago. That's what I want to look at this morning, which is John chapter 13, the first 17 verses. Let's read it together. "Now before the feast of the Passover, when Jesus knew that his hour had come to depart out of this world to the Father, having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. During supper, when the devil had already put it into the heart of Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, to betray him, Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands, and that he had come from God and was going back to God, rose from supper. He laid aside his outer garments, and taking a towel, tied it around his waist. Then he poured water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and to wipe them with the towel that was wrapped around him. He came to Simon Peter, who said to him, 'Lord, do you wash my feet?' Jesus answered him, 'What I'm doing you do not understand now, but afterward you will understand.' Peter said to him, 'You shall never wash my feet.' Jesus answered him, 'If I do not wash you, you have no share with me.' Simon Peter said to him, 'Lord, not my feet only, but also my hands and my head.' Jesus said to him, 'The one who is bathed does not need to wash except for his feet, but is completely clean. And you are clean, but not every one of you.' For he knew who was to betray him. That was why he said, 'Not all of you are clean.' When he had washed their feet and put on his outer garments and resumed his place, he said to them, 'Do you understand what I have done to you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you are right, for so I am. If I then, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have given you an example that you also should do, just as I have done to you.'" John, in starting this passage, really begins with some of his own narrative, some of his own commentary before he gets into the narrative of the story. And as he has reflected back years later on what happened that night, he finally has put the pieces together. What at the time, in the moment, seemed confusing that night, now is clear to him. And it's stunning as he understands what was really going on. And he begins by informing us of at least 6 things that Jesus knew that set the stage for this story. The first thing we find out, let me finish the passage, how about that? Truly I say to you, a servant is not greater than his master, nor is a messenger greater than the one who sent him. If you know these things, blessed are you if you do them. The first thing Jesus knew was Jesus knew that his hour had come. Now, this is kind of new because if you've been following along, you'll recall that we've run into numerous places where Jesus has said, my hour has not yet come. The first time was back in John chapter 2, verse 4, where Jesus says to his mother, woman, what does this have to do with me? My hour has not yet come. John 7:6, Jesus said to them, my time has not yet come. John 7:30, so they were seeking to arrest him, but no one laid a hand on him because his hour had not yet come. And then John 8:20, these words he spoke in the treasury as he taught in the temple, but no one arrested him because his hour had not yet come. We've seen this throughout Jesus' ministry where there is this sense that he is on a trajectory, he is on a mission, and there's a time point where it's going to be the time for things to happen, but up to this point, he has consistently said that time has not yet come. We have seen him at times heal in secret to quell the zeal of the crowds. Sometimes he has veiled his teaching in parables, setting, if you will, a delayed fuse that it wouldn't make sense until later what that teaching was all about. He's chosen at times to retreat from the crowds and even withdrawing for long periods away from Jerusalem. We've seen him spend long periods in prayer. But now, John says, there's no more delaying. The time has come. And Jesus knows that the time is here. The second thing that Jesus knows is that he knows that he loves his disciples. Knowing he loved them and he loved them to the end. What powerful words. That Jesus loved them. He loved them as individuals. It wasn't that he loved the crowds. You know, that's what superstars love, right? They love crowds. They love numbers. They love knowing that a lot of people are paying attention to them, that they're following them on Twitter, they're sending them likes on Facebook. They love that mass appeal. But that's not what Jesus was about. Jesus loved them. He loved this group of disciples. Despite their flaws, their failures of faith, his heart was tender toward them. And he was committed to them unto the very end. Again, these are the words of an old man, John, the apostle, that they're written in retrospect. And it's only when all was finished and done that any of them could really understand how much they had been loved, how deeply Christ's love went for them, even in times of chaos. If you think about these disciples on this night that this happens, and you think about what's going to happen to them over the next few days, nothing about that would have felt like they were living in love. They would experience fear, chaos, pain, loss. They would think that the one who had been their master was gone forever. You know, I think we find ourselves in those situations sometimes, don't we? You ever been there? Chaos, pain, confusion, loss. They seem to rule the day, and we wonder, where has God gone? If he loves me so much, why do I feel so alone and at such a loss right now? You know, the Apostle John had seen a lot of pain. Among those disciples who had been there that night with him, he knew that many of them, at the time he wrote this gospel, had already paid the ultimate price of their lives for their faith in Jesus. He knew what loss was like. He knew what pain was like. He knew what hardship was like. And he also had come to understand that through it all, and to the very end, he was loved by Christ. The second verse in John 13 gives us an ominous aside and tells us something else that Jesus knew. It says the devil had already put it into the heart of Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, to betray him. And Jesus knows that Judas is going to betray him. In fact, John makes a point of telling us that in verses 10 and 11. It says that he knew who was to betray him. You got to keep that in mind as we move into this story, that Jesus not only knows that he loves his disciples, he knows at that moment that one of those disciples has already started the process to betray him and to give him up. Here's the fourth thing that Jesus knows. Jesus knows the power and the authority that has been given to him. Knowing the Father had given all things into his hands. The fifth thing that he knows that he has come from God. That takes us right back to John chapter 1, verse 1, where John says, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." Jesus understood who he was and where he was from, that he in fact shared in the deity and glory of God the Father himself. And he knows where he is going, that he was going back to God. Now, based on all of that knowledge, if you had this knowledge, if you knew that you were from God, co-equal with the Father, if you knew your hour had come, that you were about to make the ultimate sacrifice of your very life, if you knew that you were about to return back to the Father's right hand, that you'd been given all glory and power, if you knew that one of those who had followed you, that you had given so much for, that you'd spent so much time teaching, you knew that he was already a traitor in his heart, what would you do for your last meal with them? I know what I would do. I would want a party. I'd want a big party. I want a party all about me. I would want streamers. I'd want banners. I'd want my favorite food. I would like them to sing to me because I want them to understand who I am and that I am totally worth it. And as far as the worthless guy there that's about to undo me, I would want to publicly shame that guy. And as a group, we'd throw him out the window. If I knew all of this, that's what I would want to do. Am I unique in this? What did Jesus do? He laid aside his outer garments and taking a towel, tied it around his waist. Then he poured water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and to wipe them with the towel that was wrapped around him. Knowing all that he knew, the result of that knowledge was he began to wash their feet. Can you imagine the bewilderment of these disciples at what is going on? They don't even know half of what Jesus knows. They just know that he is their rabbi. But even from that perspective, this makes no sense to them. In fact, Luke, in his account, gives us a little more insight into what was going on that night at dinner. You know, every meal runs through various conversations, topics of interest to everyone. And here's what Luke tells us was going on during dinner. He says a dispute arose among them as to which of them was to be regarded as the greatest. This is the dinner conversation. You know, I really don't think that you should be seated like right next to Jesus because as I recall, I was the one that picked up the most bread when he broke all the bread for the masses. You know, I really should be in a little better position here. Oh, no, you shouldn't be. You remember, I was the one who helped him get in the boat when he was walking on the water. And so this little argument is going on among them. And in the midst of that, here comes Jesus washing feet. Chuck Swindoll, in his book, Improving Your Serve, says that the room was filled with proud hearts and dirty feet. Here's the word that comes to my mind. Incongruous. Incongruous is the Latin that means something that is not agreeing or not suitable. In English, it means that it's not in harmony or it's not in keeping with the surroundings, with the aspects of what's going on around it. Based on what Jesus knows, washing feet seems to me to be incongruous. It certainly seemed that way to Peter, right? John 13:8. Peter says to him, "You shall never wash my feet." Jesus, this is horrifying what's going on here. What are you doing? In fact, Peter actually uses in the Greek a double negative here. A better way to translate this would be no not. In fact, he adds a word on, no not to the eons, no not to the end of time. All right? Double negative, no not, never. In fact, remember when I was in high school, the cheerleaders had this cheer they would yell when a guy was trying to make a free throw for a basket. And the cheer went, no, no, never, never, nuh-uh-uh. Really profound stuff. But that's Peter. Jesus comes to him and Peter's going, no, no, never, never, nuh-uh-uh. You're not washing my feet. This is completely out of bounds, Jesus. It goes against all the social conventions of propriety. There's actually an ancient story told of Rabbi Ishmael who had returned home from the synagogue and his mother wanted to wash his feet. And he refused because he said it was too demeaning for his mother to wash his feet. And his mother actually took him to court, before the rabbinical court, to sue for the right to wash his feet because she said that in his case it was an honor because he was such a great rabbi. But it gives you a glimpse into how the culture looked at this act of foot washing. It was low. It was demeaning. It's interesting, John the Baptist. Remember when John the Baptist saw Jesus coming, how he tried to describe the majesty of Jesus compared to himself? He said, "There is one coming among you whose sandal I am not worthy to tie." That was a way of saying, I am so low in comparison to him that I'm not even worthy to tie his laces. And yet here comes Jesus, not just tying laces, he's washing feet. In their culture, you can't get any lower than that on the social ladder than to wash someone else's feet. So what's Jesus' response? Jesus says, "What I am doing you do not understand now, but afterward you will understand." Peter, there is more going on here than you can understand right now. Afterward. After what? Peter is so unnerved by the moment that he doesn't even know to ask the follow-up question. He should have said, "Lord, what do you mean afterward? What's coming next?" Jesus says, "If I do not wash you, you have no share with me." What does that mean? If I don't wash you, you have no share with me. I think that Jesus is teaching really two lessons on two levels. Lesson one is a lesson by example. It's a physical lesson to be emulated, and Jesus is going to talk more about that in just a moment. It's a very practical kind of truth. The second lesson is more symbolic because it speaks to a spiritual reality. It depicts in a physical way a spiritual truth that they cannot yet really comprehend. But it's designed to leave an impression that will become deeper and more meaningful as they see what's about to unfold between the cross and the resurrection. When Jesus says, "having a part in me," it's really inheritance language. It's not a demand of, "you'd better let me or else." But it's a truth that to be part of God's family, to claim that inheritance, each one of us needs a cleansing that only Jesus can provide. The way to lay hold of the inheritance of Jesus was not because of anything they could do for themselves. It was because of something that Jesus did for them. Dealing with a part of them that they did not want to deal with. The dirtiest, lowest part, Jesus dealt with. And allowing him to deal with it was what allowed them to lay hold of the inheritance. Well, Peter's reaction, once he finds out that this seems to be pretty important if you're going to be in the club, he says, Lord, not my feet only, but also my hands and my head. Which my paraphrase would go like this: I have absolutely no idea what you're talking about, but whatever it is, sign me up, hose me down, and put a bow in my hair, I'm in. That's Peter. Jesus' answer is, the one who is bathed does not need to wash except for his feet, but is completely clean, and you are clean, but not every one of you. This is the idea of bathing, and Jesus again is talking about this spiritual reality. If we go back to John chapter 1, verse 12, it says that all who did receive him, who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God. If I could paraphrase Jesus' words, it would be something like this: Peter, you have received me. You've opened your heart, you've put your trust in me, and when it comes to taking the dive of faith, you are a spiritual cannonball, Peter. You are there. You are bathed. But I want you to realize that it wasn't Peter's faith that bathed him. All Peter did was place his heart into the river of God's grace. He simply had believed. He simply had followed. It was Jesus who had bathed him. In their culture, it was understood that you didn't need to bathe before every meal to be considered clean. It was just the extremities that needed washing before the meal. If you wanted to put this into theological framework, I'd say this is the process of sanctification. Salvation is that bathing, that receiving God's grace, that being forgiven and brought into his family. And that is something that only needs to be done once. But as we go through life, we grow, we fail, we make strides forward, we stumble back. And there is an ongoing process of cleansing, of coming to Christ, accepting his forgiveness, repenting. That goes on. It doesn't mean that we need to get re-saved. But it is that sense of staying in constant dependence and relationship with him. I said earlier that there were two lessons Jesus was teaching. One of them symbolic and spiritual, the other being exemplary and practical. Having spoken to Peter of the spiritual, he now turns to the practical. Verse 12. When he had washed their feet and put on his outer garments and resumed his place, he said to them, do you understand what I have done to you? Do you know what I've done? Short answer, not a clue. Something profound is going on. That whole dialogue with Peter, that was pretty interesting to eavesdrop on. But for these guys, their toes are still damp. They're still picking dinner crumbs out of their beards. And they're trying to figure out what it is that Jesus is really up to. In the normal scope of life, an act like this might mean, you owe me. I scratch your back, you scratch mine. Burnett had an experience years ago working at Northrop. I'm going to ask, could someone get me a glass of water? I'm just a little dry. Burnett was working at Northrop, which was a big aerospace company in Southern California. Thank you. Wow, that was fast. And she serves great water. And she was a secretary there. And one day, another secretary, Burnett had gotten finished up on all of her tasks. And she knew another secretary was pretty overwhelmed, and so she just said to her, hey, if there's anything I can help you out with, let me know. And then she went to lunch. She comes back from lunch, and she has this note on her desk that says, in essence, don't ever ask me that again. I guess the sense is, are you implying that I can't handle my work? And I don't want to owe you. Because if I do something for you, then I know, or if I let you do something for me, then I know that I have to do something for you to pay it back. That's not what Jesus is doing here. Jesus isn't saying, do you know what I've done for you? Now you owe me. It's a demonstration. He is demonstrating what love looks like. He's demonstrating his love for each one of them. He's demonstrating it through this simple physical act, that what he is preparing to do for them at a very profound and spiritual level. And what he's calling them to do is to respond in love, to release their personal agendas, to quit squabbling about who is the greatest at the table, but to come alongside their brothers and sisters, not to gain God's love, but to love as they have been loved. John 13 and 14, he says, "You call me teacher and Lord, you're right, for so I am. If I then, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet." He hasn't made them beholden to him, but rather he's created this template for them to use with each other. Remember what Luke told us in his gospel, how these guys were squabbling about who was the greatest? Concerned about the seating order at the table? Who was closest to the head? Who was farthest from the foot? Well, now Jesus directs them not just to the foot of the table. He directs them to their very own feet. And actually not even their feet. He directs them to their neighbors' dirty, smelly feet. He's saying that this kind of love requires a deep heart change of humility. Do you remember why the Pharisees wanted Jesus dead? I think we talked about this in John 12. What they were afraid of was that because of Jesus' ministry, they were going to lose their place and their power. They were willing to kill a man to protect their status. Jesus didn't take on this humble task of washing feet because he didn't have any legitimate claim to honor. It wasn't because he didn't have any position that he did this. In fact, he freely admits that he is their teacher and Lord. He doesn't apologize for that. He says, "You call me that, and you're right. I am. I am the boss." And so he's not calling them to some act of personal debasement or phony humility or pretending that he isn't what he really is. But he also wants them to know that that role, that place of honor, doesn't set him apart from the call of love. Because in fact, what makes him the master is his love. Jesus' description of himself in Matthew 11:29, "I am gentle and humble in heart." Don't forget where the story starts. Having loved his own, he loved them to the end, completely and fully. You know, when I met Burnett, I was pretty young, 8th grade at the bus stop. Much of my adolescence was spent trying to get her attention and win her affection. I was willing to do all kinds of things by way of service to let her know that I really liked her. And I really wanted her to like me. But you know, after 35 years of marriage, I've come to see loving her with different eyes. When I serve her now, it's not because I hope she'll like me. It's because I have seen her bear our 4 children and mother them. I have experienced her caring for me when I was sick. I've seen her stand by me in dark times. And I know how much she loves me. And that changes the motivation for my loving her. It's not to try and get her to accept me. It is because I recognize how much I have been accepted and loved. Some of us come to God thinking that loving him means that we are dedicated to vying for his attention. That we have to do enough good things that will earn his favor. And we have to do enough good things to make up for the times that we haven't made him happy. And we're working so hard and we're serving, but we're serving for all the wrong reasons. Trying to get God to like us when the fact is he loves us. Dirty feet and all. He knew we had dirty feet when he went to the cross. It's why he went to the cross, was because he loved us and he called us into his family. And he isn't waiting for us to get it together. He wants us to come to him. And then understanding his heart, he asks us to love. You see, to be loved deeply and yet to withhold love from others is to not understand love. So how do I measure my grasp of Christ's love? Well, considering how I serve may give some insight. Are there spheres of life where I am jealous of others? I'm afraid they're getting ahead of me. Is it important that I be recognized and respected for my service? What happens when I really do something for someone? I really serve, I really give, and I don't get the accolades that I think I should have gotten? Is there some tedious or unpleasant job that I know needs to be done, but I've already decided that I don't do that kind of work? I'm not saying we all need to go looking for dirty jobs. In fact, that can become its own kind of pride. Some people pride themselves on being noted for doing the dirty job. Pride's amazing. We can get proud over anything. It's just crazy. But are we really loving if we're not serving? And are we loving deeply if we only serve conveniently? It'd be nice if we could just leave this as a matter of attitude and introspection. It would give us all something profound to think about this afternoon. Unfortunately, Jesus said this: I've given you an example that you also should do just as I have done to you. Truly, truly, I say to you, a servant is not greater than his master, nor is a messenger greater than the one who sent him. If you know these things, blessed are you if you do them. Catch that little game-changing word there? Jesus didn't just leave us a beautiful truth to ponder. He didn't ask us just to be regular attenders, but constant servers. Our faith isn't simply professing, but it is doing, not just believing, but obeying. So, what are you doing? That's a good question all of us should be asking ourselves. What am I doing? Where am I actively stepping up to the plate to serve others? Maybe a good question is, what am I avoiding? Where do I see a need and I just decided I'm not going to get involved there? Piper last week talked about John chapter 15, where Jesus says that there's no greater love than for someone to lay down their life for another. That is true, but often the service that we're called on isn't so much the grandiose laying down of my life as it is the small things that aren't so heroic. How do we check ourselves? Again, this isn't about how many church things do you do. Okay, what I'm going to give you here is a very crude measure. If you walk away from this service and say, you know what Pastor Tim said this morning was, I need to give X number of hours to the church, you will have missed the point of the sermon, okay? But if you're trying to take your temperature and say, well, do I really ever give myself anywhere? Here is one really crude thing you could ask yourself. In the Old Testament, when it came to giving, they were to give of the first fruits. In terms of their money, it was the tithe. It was 10%. Maybe one way to check our temperature a little bit is to figure that if you're working and you give at least 40 hours a week to making money for you, then what would a tithe of time look like? If you just worked off that 10%, it'd be like 4 hours. Can you think of at least 4 hours in your week where you've given yourself away to someone? You've given yourself in service, in ministry. That doesn't necessarily mean giving yourself to formal, established areas of church ministry. Service should be an organic part of our life as God's community, but committing to a regular ministry commitment is a good way to avoid wandering around in the desert of good intentions, because we all can do it. Sometimes we talk about using our gifts to pursue our passions, which is good. It's wonderful when God shows you something you're passionate about in ministry and your gifts align with it and you're excited to be involved in that. But it's interesting that what Jesus chose to demonstrate service was not something that I think anyone was passionate about. It was washing feet. Jesus didn't say, guys, I just discovered I have a gift for foot washing, and this is a vision I've always had to be involved in washing dirty feet, and finally it's realized. Not a single one of those disciples thought that was their gift, their passion, their calling, none of that. And yet Jesus says, this is sometimes what serving looks like. Sometimes it means stepping out of my comfort zone. It means doing the thing that I wouldn't say I'm necessarily super equipped for, but it's a need I see and I'm willing to step in and do it. You know, I imagine you could have listed this need, foot washer needed, for probably 6 weeks running in their church bulletin and nobody would have volunteered. Sometimes maybe we're a little too quick to say, I don't do that. Some of us aren't avoiding humble tasks. We are deeply engaged, and maybe we're not seeing the great value of it. This is Mother's Day. Talk about a class of people that are oftentimes engaged in humble tasks and don't think anybody notices. You know, it's one more nasty diaper that needs to be changed. It's runny noses, it's runny diapers, and it's running to one more soccer practice, and does anybody care? Some of us have mothers on the other end of the spectrum who are aging, and fathers. And we deal with a different set of demands there because no longer are they the ones caring for us, we're caring for them. And sometimes we're caring for them in ways that aren't very glamorous. And they're tedious and they're repetitive and they're hard and sometimes they're heartbreaking. Those thankless things that chafe at our sense of significance, the drudgery of a million meaningless things that sap at our energy. We ask ourselves, does anyone care? Does it matter that I'm pouring my life out in these ways? Do we matter when we're consumed by the small things? And I just want to remind you that the one who washed feet also hung on a cross for you, because he saw your life as having worth and significance that he was willing to give himself for. And your Lord sees every one of those humble tasks. He is pleased when we do those humble things in love. He understands the kind of humility it takes to be willing to be nothing. And he says that those humble acts done to his glory are in fact the seeds of blessing. I think every young mom, if they wanted, could hold up a poopy diaper as a sacrifice of praise. Say, because I am so loved. This act of service is not a meaningless thing. It is meaningful when it's done in love. As I was going through this passage, my attention was drawn to something I don't think I'd seen it before quite this way. But it's the comparison between John chapter 13 and Philippians chapter 2. Let me just walk you through it, because it tells me that maybe Paul and John at some point had a long conversation about these things. John 13, verse 14. If then your Lord and teacher have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. The Apostle Paul in Philippians 2 says, do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility count others more significant than yourselves. Let each of you look not only to his own interests, but also to the interests of others. Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands and that he had come from God and was going back to God, rose from supper, laid aside his outer garments, and taking a towel, tied it around his waist. Have this mind among yourselves, which is yours in Christ Jesus, who, though he was in the form of God, did not count equality with God a thing to be grasped, but emptied himself by taking the form of a servant, being born in the likeness of men. Then he poured water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and to wipe them with the towel that was wrapped around him. Being found in human form, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. When he had washed their feet and put on his outer garments and resumed his place. Therefore God has highly exalted him and bestowed on him the name that is above every name, so that at the name of Jesus every knee should bow in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and every tongue confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. It's fascinating and it's ironic. These disciples thought that they had just seen a tremendous act of humility and service by their revered rabbi washing their feet. They had no idea that what they were about to witness was something far, far greater, which was the creator of the cosmos pouring out his life to redeem theirs. It reminds me a little bit of Timothy Villalba. You remember the impoverished, malnourished child in the Philippines? When Timothy got to be 17 years old, he graduated from the Compassion Program. And when he graduated, he received a visit from Angie Lathrop. Now, Angie at the time was the executive assistant to Wes Stafford, who was at that time the president of Compassion International. Not every orphan gets a visit from the executive assistant of the head of the organization, but Timothy did. Angie went all the way to the Philippines because she wanted Timothy to know something about that kind gentleman who had been supporting him all those years. What she wanted him to know was that George Walker actually had another name. He was, in fact, George Herbert Walker Bush, the 41st president of the United States. Timothy knew that he'd been loved. He knew that somebody had served him. He just had no idea really of who it was that was serving him. 1 John chapter 3, verse 1. See what great love the Father has lavished on us, that we should be called children of God. Do you understand how much you are loved? The God of the universe has lavished his love on us, and Jesus said, I want you to see how deep my love is as I kneel at your feet and wash them, and very soon you will watch me hang on a cross and die. To cleanse you. Not because you worked for it, not because you owe it to me, but because I love you. What I'm asking you to do now is to go and love, to serve as you have been served. I have given you an example that you also should do just as I have done to you. If you know these things, blessed are you if you do them. Amen?